Okay, so we're gonna work one example of quadratic methods. So quadratic methods actually include the zero factor property, but sometimes, as we know, we have equations that are not factorable, and so we can't apply the zero factor property if something is not factorable. In that case, we can use the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula solves any quadratic equation, so that's something of this form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And remember, the quadratic equation says that then x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, okay? So we're gonna look at something that ends up in that form and then see how we can use this quadratic formula method to solve it. Okay, so looking at this, we have sine of x times 3 sine of x minus 1 equals 1. Now, you may be tempted to say that that is factored, and so we can apply the zero factor property, but it is not. Remember, it's the zero factor property, not the one factor property. So while this looks factored, it is factored, it's useless because it's not equal to 0. So the first thing we need to do is actually distribute this sign. So that'll give me 3 sine squared of x minus sine of x, and I'm going to move this 1 over by subtracting 1 from both sides equals 0. So now I have this as a quadratic equal to 0. But notice this is not factorable. 3x squared minus x minus 1 is not factorable, so I need to use the quadratic equation. Now here, we need to pull off our coefficients, our a, our b, and our c. So here's our a. Our b is going to be right here. It's going to be negative 1. So a is 3, b is negative 1, and c is also negative 1. So plugging, c is negative 1. Plugging into the quadratic equation, we have negative b, so negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Now let's go ahead and simplify this. So under the square root, we have negative 1 squared, which is 1, minus 4 times 3 times negative 1. Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12 times negative 1 is positive 12. So negative 1 becomes 1 plus or minus the square root of 13 all over 6. Okay, so what do we know? We know that this thing, our sine, so sine of x is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 13 plus 6. Now clearly this value is not going to appear on our unit circle, so let's go ahead and get a decimal approximation for this and then use our calculator methods to figure out what our x is equal to. Okay, so first I'm just going to grab a calculator. I don't think you need to watch me do this. And let's figure out the decimal approximation. Notice there are 2 answers here. So first I'm going to do 1 plus the square root of 13. That's not 13. Oh my goodness, I can't use calculator. Especially not when I'm trying to do it fast. Divided by 6. And that gives me approximately 0.767. So 0.7676 for rounding purposes. And then I'm going to do 1 minus the square root of 13 divided by 6, which gives me negative 0.4343. Okay, so now I'm really solving 2 things. I have that sine of x equals 0.7676, and I have that sine of x equals negative 0.4343. I'm going to use our calculator to find the inverse of each of these. In other words, I'm going to take arc sine or inverse sine of both sides of this equation. And so I'll have that x from here equals inverse sine of 0.7676. And from here, doing the same thing, taking inverse sine of both sides, I'll have that x equals inverse sine of negative 0.4343. So let's go ahead and go to our calculator and see what we get for those numbers and then come back and talk about that. Okay, so let's go ahead and do our answer for this one in degrees. So I'm going to switch my mode back to degrees, and then I'm going to get to the home screen. Okay, and we wanted to do inverse sine. So I'm going to hit second sine. That gives me inverse sine of 0.7676 to start with. 0.7676. And that gets us approximately 50.13 degrees. So there's one possible answer. And then we're also going to hit second inverse of negative 0.4343. So that gets us another answer of negative 25.74 degrees. So I'm going to write those up, and then we're going to go ahead and talk about what those mean. Okay, so we have x equals 50.14 degrees. Now we're solving this between 0 and 360. So that's one answer. And then remember, when we're thinking about sine, we also get an answer that we can think of as 180 minus this. In other words, the supplement to this. So if I do 180 minus 50.14, I get a second answer of 129.86. And then let's look at this answer here. Now this, negative 25.74 degrees, is not between 0 and 360. So we need to get a coterminal angle that is within that interval. To find a coterminal angle, we're going to add 360 degrees. So negative 25.76 plus 360 gives me 334.24. Okay. And then we're going to subtract 180 from that to get our other value where sine is going to be equal to this. So then we also get 154.24 degrees. So 4 answers we got using the quadratic equation. And then thinking about kind of how sine works, we also got to practice our calculator skills with this one.